time. Um, People roll in when they do. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the last wine of the box, wine of the Grape American Road Trip box, the fourth week. Also, welcome to the last week of the summer, right? I guess Labor Day weekend is this weekend. So enjoying the last summer. And as I was talking about it, but I have windows open in Columbia, South Carolina. It's starting to feel livable down here, which is awesome. But in case we're tasting, this should be the last bottle that you have left. If it's not, then you fucked up the order somehow along the way, but no big deal. But this is what we're tasting today. 2022 Iapetus Substrata is what we got today. Just a few announcements. The next month's box enrollment is wrapped up at this point. So there's like one or two people, I think, that still have outstanding invoices. But if you want to join at this point, it's too late. I'm sorry. I've already come down to Colombia, so sorry. But in case you did not hear, next month's box is the Central European box. But really, it's the three countries. So we're talking about Czech, Slovakia, and Hungary. So we got some really fun wines in there next month. Just like this month, is a lot of it kind of driven by my own personal kind of curiosity, using this opportunity for me to learn more about these kind of different places. So yeah, looking forward to learning a lot more, doing much more deep dive into these three countries than I've ever have. So yeah, looking forward to the next month. But anyways, that's up to you. Next week, obviously, Case Club will open on Thursday, but we'll talk more about that next week. But that's about really the only announcement that I have about the wine club. Last but not least, 6 Foot Wine Club is committed to donating 1% of its gross revenue to an organization whose mission statement aligns with its values. And this month, I have chosen Climate Ride. At this point, I sound like a broken record. But yeah, this is the organization that I go on my annual cycling trip with. And this year, or at the beginning of 2026, in January, I'm going to Chile to go on a cycling challenge in the Patagonia region of Chile. And I have committed to raising $4,600 for this organization, which is a Climate Ride, which is an organization who donates all that money to different organizations that fights climate change. So like I mentioned, this is my birth month. August 17th was my birthday. It's about to end. It's about to come to an end. So if you ever wanted to buy me a birthday drink, instead of buying me a birthday drink, I graciously ask that you make the donation to the Climate Ride. So I can go to Chile, ride a bike, and also help raise money to combat climate change. If you don't want to, or you can't, that's totally fine too, but it's in there. It's in the chat box. The links are in the chat box if you want to learn more about what they do. Also, there are some spots still open in Chile. So at the beginning of January, if you want to come ride 300 miles and climb 13,000 feet in the volcanoes of Chile, come with, because it'd be fun. It'd be hard, but it'd be fun. I'm planning on going and visiting some wine producers down there after the trip. So you can come with that too. So think about it if you're interested. That's all the announcements I have. Any other questions or any questions or comments or anything before we get into the wine and the winemaker? Cool. Hearing none. Let's get into it. Just in case you're joining us now, we are tasting this guy. This is the last bottle in the box, 2022 Iapetus Substrata. It is a wine that I've been wanting to work with for a long time. For those of you who've been in 6 Foot Wine Club for a while, you know I have this kind of personal fascination and curiosity about Vermont. And Iapetus has been on my radar for some time. But for a variety of reasons, the first, it was kind of they weren't available in DC. And once it did become available, the inventory reasons and all that, I just couldn't line it all up. Finally, I was able to line it all up with this box. So I'm pretty stoked to have this to feature it this month. But even more excitingly, I also was able to get Ethan, who's the winemaker for Iapetus, join us today. So, which is always fun to have. And in case you're not familiar with Ethan, let me give you a little bio to introduce him. Ethan Joseph has been growing grapes and making wine in Vermont since 2008, which means he's spent nearly 2 decades making wine in a state that is perhaps better known for its maple syrup, maybe beer. And in case you guys didn't know, the whiskey that you've been drinking, Whistle Pig, is also from Vermont, which is also delicious. As winemaker at Iapetus and vineyard manager at Shelburne Vineyard, he oversees every step from vineyard to glass with a focus on northern varieties and minimally innovation winemaking. Ethan founded Iapetus in 2016 as a creative space to craft wines with a strong sense of place and a story worth telling, one that begins millions of years ago with the Vermont soils and continues each time a cork is pulled. He also shares his expertise nationally as a speaker and served as treasurer of the Vermont Grape and Wine Council, all while firmly believing that wine should be enjoyed however it brings the most amount of joy, even if that means sipping it from a plastic cup by the pool, which is an ethos that I think we here at Six Foot Wine Club can very much sympathize with. Anyways, Ethan Joseph, welcome. Thanks for being generous for your time, and thanks for coming into spending a Wednesday evening with us, Ethan.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Nice to see everybody.
Excellent. Well, I figure if anybody's like me, let's start with this. Just by show of hands, how many of you have had Iapetus or have had Vermont wines before? Excellent. All right, Ethan, you're popping cherries left and right tonight. Well, I myself, I've had Vermont wines as well, but this was actually the first time that I was able to kind of taste through Iapetus wines. But yeah, I am I've been the first one to admit it when it comes to Vermont viticulture or viticultural history and kind of scene of Vermont. I'm rather clueless. I don't really know much about it. So first, I figured let's start with Vermont and it's kind of viticulture history. What's happening in Vermont? What has been happening? Yeah, tell us, give us a little background.
Sure. Yeah, but Vermont certainly not, in the top 40 for where you think of first for where you might be growing wine. And that's not unfounded. It's not the first place I would think that I'd be making wine either. But our industry is very young. The first commercial vineyards in Vermont were established in the late 90s. Shelburne Vineyard, the parent company of Iapetus, happened to be one of those early pioneers in 1999. And, at the time, Vermont's an agricultural community, so it wasn't too far off to just be trying something new. Cider has a long history here. And, we used to grow hops, 100 years ago, but apples really was the kind of the main, I don't know, call it specialty crop, along with maple syrup and of course dairy. But it were, the folks that got started early on in Vermont were kind of just curious, had their own personal passion for wine. Hybrids at that time, really, nobody paying attention to them, nobody really giving them any respect. Nobody really knew what could grow in Vermont and what would grow in Vermont. So, there were some initial trials with vinifera. Shelburne Vineyard planted some Zweigelt, planted some Reisling, along with some of the French American hybrids like Vignoles, Traminette. We also planted Cayuga. That was the kind of stuff that other people were planting too. Maybe a little bit like Marechal Foch at Snow Farm, who's still around as well. And that kind of persisted for maybe a decade, and kind of coinciding with that, the University of Minnesota and some, private breeders in the Midwest were also had been working on grape hybridization specifically for, northern climates. And there were some early ones that came out, but people hadn't really there wasn't any opportunity to try them. Again, these kind of non-traditional regions were all very small, very little kind of I don't know, current history. I mean, wine's been made in a lot of the states for decades or millennia, really, or hundreds of years, or 100 years, like Ohio and the Midwest and that kind of thing. But in the kind of modern winemaking times, it's all relatively new, with the other varieties that are now available. So it was in like the kind of like 2006, um, is when Marquette was released by the University of Minnesota. Um, and that's kind of when a kind of a core group of Vermont vignerons had tasted enough of them, albeit it was still, very few. But they felt that it was kind of like this was a wine that had a lot of potential, and it on paper and in the history of it being grown in Minnesota and a couple other trial locations, it seemed like it would be suitable for the Vermont climate. So that went in the ground for us in 2006 when it was first available. And then, La Crescent was also around at the time. The Frontenac family was out a little bit earlier. But again, kind of some of those earlier hybrids, cold hardy hybrids, were just a little too far out there in terms of the wine they were producing to really be marketable at that time. But so slowly, as we're moving forward here, Vermont just took all of those varieties very seriously. I often compare what we're doing in Vermont, or sorry, I also compare what we're doing in Vermont to like what happened in the Finger Lakes. And this is really to highlight our differences in approach versus kind of really comparing what we're doing. But the Finger Lakes, and rightly so. I mean, they're making fabulous Riesling and should absolutely continue to do that. But they're a location in the a wine growing region that can grow vinifera marginally. Again, I'm talking like 10, 20 years ago, but could grow hybrids well. Suitable hybrids were suitable, but are very much like vinifera centric, right? They're trying to play into that kind of world market. Just people know vinifera, hybrids, kind of second class citizens. So that's how that kind of mindset transfers over to what they do in the vineyard, right? So they're going to grow their Riesling and their Pinot Noir or Chardonnay like as well as they can, right? That's getting all the primo treatment, very carefully grown. They're hybrids, they're Cayuga, they're cropping it at 10, 12, 15 tons an acre. Nobody's hands ever touches a vine. And they sell $5, $6 bottles of wine. Whereas in Vermont, we just couldn't grow hybrids. We didn't have a choice. If we wanted to have a wine industry, it was going to be hybrids. So from the get-go, we were like, well, we got to grow them well, right? It's the only way to get good wine out of a grape is to have good fruit, and get good fruit, you have to farm them well. So, that is something that I think Vermont really focused on from the beginning, and is really what has made Vermont, albeit still very small in this way, but a leader kind of in the cold climate, non-traditional wine space. It's just because we embraced what we were able to do well, as opposed to being apologetic about it. It was just like, well, here, if you want Vermont wine, this is what it is. This is what you're going to get. This is the profile it has. It's not going to be like anything you've ever had before, but that's what makes it exciting. And so, we're still a tiny industry. We have under 200 acres of commercially grown vines in the state. 25 wineries, most of which are quite boutique, producing under 1,000 cases, if not only a few hundred. So, 25, 26 years old, very little acreage. We're not producing a lot of wine. We're not making a big mark on the industry as a whole, but in the in the space where we are working, we've definitely kind of made ourselves a region to pay attention to in terms of the hybrid wine movement, which, you know, by necessity is going to take over the entire wine industry. It's just a matter of time.
Uh, Excellent. That was actually right along the lines of my question that I wanted to ask, which is kind of that like similarity slash contrast with the Finger Lakes and my hybrid. So you kind of answered all of those already, so which is fantastic. I pulled this up on the screen, which is I don't know how accurate or how reputable this source is, Ethan, but when I typed in Vermont wine maps, it's basically this is one of the things that popped up. And these are kind of like the locations of different wineries within Vermont. And first, I wanted to show, well, I guess we'll go with this one first. This is what the Shelburne Vineyard is, where Ethan works, which is just south of Burlington. And as you can see, it's right by this huge, gigantic body of water, which is Lake Champlain. And just like Finger Lakes, I kind of wanted to ask you about just kind of overall climate wise, like here, what we were just talking about this right before folks jumped in, but like how challenging it is during the summertime, but as well as the winter, because in one way it gets very hot and humid, but in another way it also gets bitterly cold. So in a way, this kind of having this body of water is what moderates a lot of that, which is exactly what makes Finger Lakes possible. But unlike there, here I also see that there's a lot of vineyards that are kind of splattered across many different parts of, even way, way away from the lake, in like a mountain towns like a Stowe. So yeah, I wanted to ask you about how that's possible. Like how is a winemaking, how is a climate different from, I guess, somewhere where you are by Lake Champlain versus some of these more inland parts of.
Yeah, sure. Well, I will clarify. I mean, I don't know how current this image is, but some of these dots are going to most likely represent like tasting rooms, which wouldn't necessarily have vineyards. There are definitely vineyards in the spine of the Green Mountains, which is that kind of dark region there between Burlington and Stowe, you know, up and down the length of the state. But so, I mean, our limiting factor, and again, I'm talking, I guess it's difficult to talk about, it's difficult to talk about this stuff with any sort of, call it, certainty anymore. I mean, in the last decade, things have changed quite dramatically. At least, you know, on the ground from what we see in terms of how the vines are growing and how behaving. So, you know, historically, you know, our limiting factor has been just deep winter cold, right? If our low temperature is, you know, negative 25 degrees Fahrenheit, you know, anything that is less hardy than that is not something that we're going to be able to grow well without it dying almost every year. So enter, you know, a lot of the Minnesota hybrids. Certainly in Vermont, along the lake, we are in one of the warmer regions, if not the warmest. I mean, the Connecticut River Valley on the south and the eastern side of the state, also pretty warm. But Champlain Valley definitely up there. And that has pros and cons. You know, our winter low might not be quite as extreme, but we can see, you know, we do have a longer growing season, which is also beneficial. But because these varieties were really selected to withstand harsh temperatures, you know, if they're being grown in, you know, at, you know, 1,500, 2,000 foot elevation, they kind of just respond to that environment in that, like, you know, if you're on a hill and have good air drainage, you know, you also may not see that extreme deep winter cold, right? So part of it is slight selection within even a more marginal growing area. But then also, like, in terms of worrying about frost issues, you know, down in the valley, we're always at a frost risk till kind of latter half of May. Whereas in the, you know, the colder regions, the vines are going to stay dormant longer, even though their frost period might be even a little bit later. So things just kind of shift, like this window just kind of moves depending exactly on where you are. Um, but I mean, a lot of that is kind of all out the window now. I mean, we've just seen such variability in the last, even just the last 3, 4, 5 years. I mean, in 2023, we had a devastating frost, probably almost hit down. I mean, I know it was down in like Virginia and southern Pennsylvania and New Jersey and out as far west as Ohio. I mean, this was a massive frost event and it was on our historical frost-free date, right? The latest frost ever recorded in our history of keeping track. We had a devastating frost, and ironically, we've never had a killing frost in my nearly 20 years of doing this. We've never had a killing frost in the fall. Sorry, in the spring. Um, Now that in and of itself isn't, that's an isolated event, but um, it does that coupled with all these other changes that we're seeing are indicative of just a very dynamic climate pattern that, is changing season to season. Um,
Is it getting warmer and then you were having to pick harvest
Yeah,
earlier?
so I mean, so on a whole, it's definitely getting warmer, and getting warmer, that in and of itself isn't a bad thing, right? I mean, we don't need to push the limits of the vine's hardiness every year, right? If they're hardy down to -25, if it's -15 or -20, like that's still cold enough. The low winter temperature that these things can withstand is really determined. At like an academic level and like a lab setting. In the field, there's lots of variability that can be, plus or minus 5, 10 degrees of hardiness. Um, but um, yeah, so it is getting warmer. And as I said before, historically, our limiting factor was kind of low winter temperature. And that is becoming less of a challenge for us because we aren't regularly seeing -15 even. So our challenge now, or in the last 5, 10 years, has become the shoulder seasons and the drastically different weather patterns in October, November, December, and March, April, May, um, that all kind of coincides with the acclimation to winter and the deacclimation out of winter. Um, and so we're seeing, I guess it's fair to say, tremendous amount of vine issues related to that. We're seeing accumulated cold damage, not necessarily from deep winter cold, but from cold events that happen at a sensitive point in the vine's phenology in
Yeah.
those shoulder seasons. And that's like a real hard one, you know, as an aside, hybrids, people talk a lot about hybrids as um, being more resilient, which I think that is true, but it's only to a certain extent, right? Like any hybrid vine isn't necessarily more or less able to just like physically adapt than any other hybrid or not hybrid, right? Like you can take a hybrid and put it in an environment, and if you dramatically change that environment, it's not like that hybrid's going to all of a sudden just also thrive, right? Because the important thing to remember is that all of the hybrids that are popping up in different parts of the world are very specifically being hybridized for those regions. Uh,
Mhm.
so you might have varieties that are looking for heat stress or low winter cold. I think as a blanket, everybody's looking for disease resistance. I mean, wine quality is a huge component of the breeding process. So there's different traits. But just because we have a Marquette vine that is well adjusted to low winter temperatures, it doesn't mean that it's going to survive 10 years of drought stress.
Right.
We would need a vine that was hybridized to have the traits of a vine that can tolerate drought stress. So it's not something that's just like, it's not easy to, um, it's not easy for us as wine growers to like adapt that quickly, right? Like there aren't hybrid varieties like coming out every year that are going to be suitable to, 15 inches of rain in the fall and then 2 months of bone dry weather in the spring and then 2 months of bone dry weather in the fall, right? That's just like, these are just like impossible growing conditions or not impossible growing conditions, but just very challenging growing conditions. Um, and so what we're finding is that the varieties that we are working with and that have historically done well for us are most likely not going to be the varieties that take us into the future.
Interesting.
Because we're already seeing in a very real way
Yeah.
that is true. Specifically was what I said about the shoulder seasons. So we're going to be, I mean, we're constantly talking about like what varieties, if we're going to replant something, like what varieties should we plant? Can we plant? We're for sure committed to growing hybrid varieties. I mean, we want the kind of the sustainability aspects that come with that in terms of, disease tolerance or resistance. Um,
You
but
mean less need to spray, less need to use chemical
yeah,
fertilizer.
absolutely. But I mean,
Yeah.
I personally believe quite strongly that, you know, uh, people are probably not going to be planting Marquette in Vermont in like 10 years.
That's interesting. I mean, it makes complete sense, but I haven't thought about that because,
I mean, there are for sure people that wouldn't necessarily agree with me, even in the state. And I don't know if things will change that quickly, but the way things have changed in the last very short period of time, um, leads me to believe that. And like, I'm not in a hurry. We have some places now that we're going to be replanting within the next few years, and I'm not in a hurry to plant, Marquette or La Crescent because we're seeing that the climate is shifting in a way that the strengths of those varieties are no longer, I don't want to say relevant, but they're no longer um, the main challenges that we're looking to deal with.
it's I mean, because initially when you were talking about this, I was gonna because when you say yeah, all across the board it is getting warmer, then I was gonna make some maybe like a cheeky joke about maybe does that make you rethink hybrid? Maybe it's time to start planting Vitis vinifera because now it's not gonna be as cold.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
the truth is, what you were saying is true, which I have not heard anybody say. But these events happen all the time. Like the 2021 vintage across Western Europe, they were putting like all those barrels and burning throughout the night because the spring frost came.
Yeah.
Uh, but if those surprises that happen during the shoulder season at a very sensitive, vulnerable point in the vine's kind of a life cycle, then I don't know. Does it matter whether it's hybrids or Vitis vinifera? Like it's going to be difficult, right? Like
Yeah,
regardless.
true. Yeah, and that specifically is a difficult one, but that relates more just to the traits of any given variety in terms of like when they typically break bud, when you
Yeah,
typically harvest and that kind of thing. And is there time in your season to kind of get all of that done?
yeah.
And all, vines all have different requirements of cold, for their dormancy. So like that, that's factored in there as well. But no, you're right. I mean, that specific challenge isn't necessarily hybrid grape specific, but I mean, the world over, uh, will slowly be converting, out of necessity from various angles, but predominantly, I think the sustainability point is probably the driving one for the European countries,
Yeah.
for the traditional European countries. I mean, even France is looking at hybrids. Germany's got a big breeding program looking at hybrids. I mean, you know, it's become, I wouldn't say it's mainstream yet, but um, it's like one of those things that major regions are seriously looking into, even though they're not necessarily making it front and center yet.
Right.
It's something they know is going to be inevitable as people, want wines that don't get sprayed 20 times a year.
I mean, we've featured some peewee varieties on
Yeah,
this
yeah.
wine.
Yep.
So yeah, it's just exactly kind of what you're talking about. That's the hybridization program out of Austria that kind of I try to develop the right varieties for the right climate and for the places. So exactly to Ethan's point, too, you don't have to spray 20 times a year, spraying chemicals everywhere. Um, cool. Well, that was a real nerdy deep dive into hybrid and climate change, and I like that. That's great.
Everybody sleeping yet or what?
uh, well, maybe I reverse this order. Maybe I should have started the other way. But now I'm going to actually take us out of Vermont, and I want to ask more about you, Ethan. And I figure, what better place to start than your love affair with Carlo Rossi?
Yeah. Yeah, I do always bring that up. So I grew up in northwestern New Jersey. I don't come from, a family that drank a lot of wine. If they were drinking wine, it was, Carlo Rossi, a big jug of, Yako or something my uncle was always drinking, or, just kind of lowbrow stuff. I mean, but it was, just what everybody had is what they enjoyed drinking. It wasn't a big deal. Um, so that was so basically I just didn't have any real exposure to wine in maybe a more common sense, or what you might expect out of someone who's been making wine for the last, 18, 19 years. Um, but so I never really was interested in wine. I drank a lot of beer, I drank a lot of cider. I made a lot of beer, I made a lot of cider, as a college kid. Um, I always had an interest in agriculture. Um, had a family garden as a kid. It was something I took with me into adulthood. I had community gardens in the Burlington area as I was going to school. I studied natural resources, so kind of the natural world was something I was into. And ferment, and then as, fermenting beer, fermenting cider, fermenting vegetables, kind of had that as well. But I really just ended up at Shelburne Vineyard because it was a job that I got when I was going to school. I started working part-time in the vineyard, part-time in the tasting room, um, and we had a jug of Carlo Rossi on my wrist at the end of the day. Um, but so it wasn't really until I ended up taking, I've been basically in the same position my entire tenure there at this point. I came on as their only full-time employee, someone to take over the winemaking and the grape growing from the founder. Um, and I really just took it as a way to keep myself in Vermont. My partner, now wife, was, we had recently graduated. She didn't want to leave the state either. And again, my interest in fermenting things and growing things, I just said, hey, why not? This seems pretty fun. I'll give it a go. So it wasn't until that point that I then really just discovered or realized I had a passion for it and was really into it. I love the whole cycle. I'm fortunate in that we are small and I get to be part of literally the whole process, growing, making, selling. Um, Less so on that front than the growing and the making, but I get to see it all, and that's really what keeps me engaged over the years. It's the cyclical nature of it, working very closely just with nature and um, being in tune with these kind of they may seem like subtleties in any given season, but that you step back and you look at the trend over the last 10, 15 years, and you can really see it. And I think you can actually, one of the great things about wine, especially if you library some of it, is that you can very much see it in the product as well. So that's, just another interesting kind of angle. But yeah, so that holds true. I definitely joke that, the jug was kind of my intro, but I'm still very much um, not a pretentious wine maker, wine drinker. I don't personally care. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm interested in all the nitty-gritty details of all the stuff in the wine world, but um, at the end of the day, I don't really care that much. I just want something that is well made and tastes good. And I think really that's like what everybody should kind of at least, if you're going to pay for something, that you should at least get something that tastes good and that you like and brings you some joy. Um, so yeah, so I mean that's still very much part of kind of my overarching philosophy as a winemaker, wine consumer, somebody in the industry. It just doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to be. It's over. Wine is so overcomplicated, or has historically been traditionally overcomplicated, and I don't know. Nowadays, that just seems to make more of a mess of things. I think we need to simplify and not overthink it too much, and really just sit back and enjoy it, and get into the nitty gritty if you want. But if you don't want to, just enjoy it.
Yeah, we all, as I say all the time, the world doesn't need yet another stuffy fucking tight ass sommelier that tells you to drink Burgundy. Like we don't need another one of those. But as somebody who also traces his first wine start to two-buck chuck and yellowtail, I can. It resonates with me. Your kind of
Yeah,
wine
yeah.
journey. We started
I don't
there.
know. I don't know if I'd be in a hurry to go pick up that jug, today, but I wouldn't put it. I wouldn't put it. I wouldn't blame anybody if they did.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that also brings me. There's also a question in the chat box from Phil, but this can also. I'm going to try to tie this into the question that I was going to ask, which is, is there maybe these are two separate things. Maybe for Vermont and the kind of the wine that you're trying to make, is there a place in the world or a certain producer, certain style that kind of inspires you, and then you're trying to see if the Vermont can kind of emulate that, or maybe Vermont just exists in its own kind of category, marching to its own beat. But this field's question was, are the hybrids developed to recreate a current case? For example, do you try to mimic Riesling? Like how is the development of hybrids actually kind of work out?
Oh,
Would it
sorry.
would
Yeah.
it come out to like a flavor profile, I guess?
Oh, yeah. Well, okay. Yeah, there's a lot there. I will say that I may be somewhat unique in this, but my approach from the beginning, not that I mean, obviously I educated myself. I mean, I have no formal background in grape growing or winemaking, but I did, I got a on the job education and then, self-taught other ways. But I've been pretty intentional about not emulating or trying to produce wines like anywhere else in the world. I mean, there's myriad varieties of wines out there, but like some so the differences are just like in every bottle and every glass, whatever that's going to exist. But there's only so many styles like of wine that you can really do. So in that way, like some of the stuff that we're doing in Vermont, sure, just by default, it's going to like maybe be similar to something else that exists somewhere else in the world. But as I said earlier about embracing kind of the hybrid varieties, it has been my position to not look specifically to mimic other wines of the world. Certainly, there are things to be learned about winemaking from all over the world, but not like trying to make Marquette like a you know, Oregon Pinot or you know, wherever, or a Burgundy, you know, not very much not doing that. And maybe more specifically to Phil's question, when I talk about these wines, I definitely do not ever compare them to vinifera. Um, I wouldn't fault someone for doing that because I understand from you know, at the consumer level, it helps to have like a relatable point. But as the producer, I'm reluctant to do that because as soon as I tell you that my Louise Swenson is reminiscent of a Sauvignon Blanc, you know, boom, your mind is on Sauvignon Blanc from somewhere else in the world, and it is very much not my Louise Swenson. And so I don't like to have those inherent biases at the forefront of people's minds when they taste these wines. Um, Honestly, I am not a big fan of telling people what the wines taste like anyway. Um, you know, there's some framework, sure, that you can give, but you know, it's so subjective. There's so many different flavor compounds and aroma compounds in wine that you might get strawberry and I might get licorice, and they're probably both in there. Um, and I might just not smell one, or you might not smell the other. Yeah, I really try not to guide people too much because at the end of the day, again, this kind of gets back to what I was saying before. Like, I just want somebody to enjoy it, and I don't care if it tastes like, you know, oranges or, you know, currants or whatever to you. You know, even if it does taste like that to me, I just want you to enjoy it. You know, it could taste like peanut butter for all I care to you, but if you like it, then great. Um, so. Did that answer the question? I kind of got lost in my own rambling there.
Bill, does that answer your question? It answered my question.
Yeah, I mean that was kind of what I was getting at. They're not inventing the hybrids to mimic any other grape. They're just coming up with grapes that can grow where you live, where
Correct. Yes.
you're
Yes.
making wine.
And wine quality is certainly a component of the breeding, the selection process, because not every iteration of a, you know, numbered grape variety, you know, just so, I don't know, what would you call it? Not every grape that gets produced is going to make good wine. If that makes sense. I mean, when grapes aren't true to seed, so like on one cluster of grapes, if there's, I don't know, say 2 seeds in each one, and there's 100 berries on there, you know, you have 200 different grape varieties right there. So they may not all make very good wine, or they have wacky chemistry or something like that. So wine quality is certainly a component of it, but it's not like, oh, this tastes like Riesling or Chardonnay or Gewürztraminer or something specifically like that.
So I know Cornell does quite a bit of a hybrid program. University of Minnesota, you said. I'm sure. I think Davis has a hybrid program as well there.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to like the hybrid. I actually don't know anything about hybrid development process in this country. Is it kind of like partnership with the farmers, and then so they kind of develop it in the lab at the university with a certain settings around where the university is, and then they put it out to the farmers, and as a kind of like a partnership, you guys grow it for a number of years, and maybe university provides some grants or money to help you grow those, and you report back the results. Is that kind of how that works? Or how does a hybrid development process work in this country?
So in the past, it's been like a tremendously long timeline, you know, decades long to select a variety, and like lots of space. And that's because, you know, again, if you're doing this all by, so this is maybe I should just say something about the hybridization process in and of itself. Like this isn't GMO. This isn't, you know, this isn't done in a lab, although with the assistance of DNA sequencing, there is more kind of a lab component, you know, now. But this is just like taking pollen from this flower and putting it on, you know, the stamen of, or whatever, the pistil of another flower, just kind of just breeding that way, and then isolating that so it doesn't get pollinated else, you know, by wind another way or something like that. then taking those seeds that grow and planting those into a new grape plant and then evaluating that plant. So we're talking like tens of thousands of plants. And then, so let's just say you pick one or 100 or 1,000, and you have to keep growing them for 3 years before you get fruit. Well, you got to have like several years of fruit so you know what kind of wine it might make. Plus, you want to expose it to like a variety of different seasonal conditions and et cetera, and et cetera. So it takes, it takes a tremendously long time to do that. And so university, like University of Minnesota, I use this as an example regularly because it's something people are familiar with. But are you all familiar with the Honeycrisp apple?
Yeah.
So they hybridize the Honeycrisp apple, and they're like they have a vegetable breeding. Like that's just one of the things they do is vegetable breeding or vegetable and fruit breeding. But they're well known in the apple world for their apple breeding, and Honeycrisp is kind of their more recent claim to fame. But so the grape program kind of grew up out of that, the university funding. Now, yes, at some point, to your point, they do send out plant material to a select number of growers to trial it in the field. But honestly, it doesn't ever really get that far because what's happening on a commercial level is very different than what's happening at like on an academic farm. And so, with a lot of the varieties that we have, we're pretty much the guinea pigs at a commercial scale, at least when we planted them. Now, of course, we've been at it for, 20 years or something. So a lot of other people have also been doing this. But, Petite Pearl comes to mind as one that was a grape variety developed by a guy in the Midwest named Tom Plocker. It's a red grape variety. He released it in 2010 to be commercially grown. We actually trialed it for a little bit before that, but that is now a grape variety that is recognized in the United States and is available to propagate and plant. But I mean, we were like one of a handful of commercial growers to ever plant this variety. So we don't know anything about it. We don't know how, and it's going to perform differently in Vermont than it is in Minnesota, than it is in Indiana, than it is in Wisconsin. So yeah, for being such a young industry in Vermont, we're like, we've accomplished a lot, even though it doesn't seem that way necessarily. But everything is so new and things are kind of moving so fast that it's like and wine just isn't something that really moves fast. They're perennial plants, they take a long time to grow. You got to age wine. It's not like, you're not planting a new batch of carrots every year. You got it all is slow. So yeah, that's kind of breeding in a gross overview.
I've always found it interesting, like when people are like, "Oh, hybrids. I don't want to drink hybrids." I'm like, "What do you think Cabernet Sauvignon is? Like it's Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc crossed. Like, what do you think that is? Like, how do you think that happened? Like it's all part of the process, right? Like maybe in 100, 200 years, we'll look back and be like Louis Swanson, it would just be like as well known or as a common in household name as a Cabernet.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is the mother plant, this is a father plant, but like it's just really funny to me when people are like, oh, like this is real, like old school wine nerds are like, oh, hybrids, I don't drink hybrids. I was like, okay, all right.
Can I clarify one thing?
Yeah.
I think you said that the seeds are all kind of genetically distinct. I think apples do the same thing. So when you get a hybrid, you're not getting it from seed, right? You're getting it like as a cutting or something like that you propagate.
Correct.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the wine. We've been talking for a while. Let's drink some wine. I know you don't have the bottle with you, Ethan. But,
yeah, of course, typical, right? I was totally spaced on that.
But you said you had recently tasted it, but I'm sure you're familiar.
Yeah, I had it this weekend. Well, I guess to start, I mean, just thumbs up or just speak up. But does anybody have like a off bottle? Because we certainly don't want to be sitting here talking about the wine if somebody's like, what the heck is everybody talking about? Drinkable. Everyone's got a drinkable bottle of wine. That's what we want.
Excellent. I'll always check if the wine is faulty or not. But yeah, tell us a little more about this wine. Also, there's a question in the chat box from Dana, where does the Iapetus, the name, come from? So maybe you can roll it in there as well. So yeah, tell us about this wine. I know this is a makeup of like 5 different varieties. So yeah.
All right. Well, I'll start with where Iapetus comes from. So, as we said before, we're located right along the shores of Lake Champlain. This particular region of Vermont and that body of water over the years has been various bodies of water. So when we were thinking about this brand and how to kind of just what story we wanted to tell with this, again, as I said before, I studied natural resources. I also happened to grow up on a glacial lake in New Jersey. So water has always been like an important part of my life. And so when we were thinking about how to tell the story of this brand and how to relate it to, specifically where we were, we really wanted to ground it in the landscape. We're an agricultural product. We wanted it to be kind of have its footing there. And that's maybe a common story for the wine world, but water has always been a major influence on our immediate area. So 500 million years ago, this is, way back in the Earth's history. Just for another kind of reference point, the Adirondack Mountains, which are on the other side of the lake, they're 1 billion years old. So then they're like the oldest mountain range in the world. Lake Champlain didn't exist back then. Obviously, we were a vast ocean called the Iapetus Ocean. So the Iapetus Ocean was the first body of water that began shaping this landscape. So a lot of the bedrock that we have here was laid down in that ocean. There were very early life forms, evolving in that ocean. We've got fossil evidence of such, along the shores of Lake Champlain and exposed bedrock. We have the oldest fossilized reef in the world up in Isle La Motte in Chazy, New York, Isle La Motte on the Vermont side. So fast forward, I don't know, several 100 million years. We are now Glacial Lake, Vermont, which is freshwater. The Iapetus Ocean was saltwater. Now we're Glacial Lake, Vermont, and we're freshwater. 10,000 years after that, or moving forward in that or so, give or take, now the glaciers have retreated. The land's come up. Now it's depressed. The Atlantic Ocean fills in, and we're now the Champlain Sea, and we're saltwater again. So this is the third version of the water shaping the landscape. Then present day, we have Lake Champlain. So the idea with the Iapetus was to reach back all the way as far as we could in time to the origins of what shaped our landscape. And we came across the Iapetus Ocean and figured that would be a good way to kind of tie it all together.
So nerdy. I love it.
And then, so the rest of the Iapetus wines are all, kind of geologically themed. So substrata, earthen material in the soil. But substrata, yes. So 2022, excellent vintage. Just, great season all in all. Nice, warm, dry. Things got nice and ripe. Substrata was one of the original Iapetus releases, and it was a wine that I had a particular fondness for, and still do. I have a bit of an affinity for Louis Swenson, the grape variety, and that's what makes up the dominant percentage of the blend. It's like 60% or so. And there's some Itasca in there, which is a University of Minnesota release, sometime in around 2016 or 2017. So that's a very new variety. And then it has a little bit of Lacadie Blanc, which is again another white variety. That is one that's also a hybrid. It was developed at the research station in Ontario in like the 50s. And then it found its home in the 70s in Nova Scotia. And Nova Scotia, you know, kind of built their wine industry around Lac-a-Dee Blanc, and now they grow all kinds of stuff. But I always thought that we could grow that in Vermont. And even though it is a little less hardy than, say, La Crescent, Marquette, Louis Swenson, where we are, you know, where we were 10 years ago with the winter temperatures, it seemed like we could do it in the Champlain Valley, and it's done quite well for us. So that piece of it is a new addition to the Substrata blend. Initially, the Substrata blend, it's a wine that has evolved in terms of specific blend components, but it is always barrel fermented. It's always barrel aged. We do surly aging on it, so once the wine goes into barrel, we may rack off immediately following fermentation to get some heavy stuff, heavy yeast sediment out. We don't always, but then we age on all those fine lees, and that I just like what that does for the wine as the yeast break down. And then there's typically a stainless steel component as well, like maybe 70-30, 80-20 barrel to stainless, just to kind of brighten things up as we get ready for bottling. It is spontaneously fermented, unfined, unfiltered, and, you know, has what I would consider a low amount of sulfur. It's like under 60 parts total. Just enough to kind of protect it, give it some longevity, and just keep things stable. So that's kind of big picture winemaking side of things. But if there are any specific questions or anything that people have,
technical information aside, when you taste this wine, like what do you get in terms of, like, what do you notice about the wine? Is it in terms of structure or flavor profile? Is there something that surprised you? You're like, oh wait, like that's interesting. Or
I would say for this, again, because this, you know, my kind of reference point will be all the other vintages, you know, that I kind of have cataloged in my head. But with this one, it's definitely the ripeness of the fruit. I think that's all there in terms of not necessarily, like, you know, I'm not talking about ripeness in terms of like having the right amount of sugar for alcohol and that kind of thing. It's more like the phenolic ripeness, even though it's not like it's not a red wine, but it has the body and the texture that I had always kind of that we had always been kind of looking for in this wine. And partly, you know, we have it in other vintages, but this particular one kind of stands out. I do like the addition of that bit of it has a bit of an increased amount of Itasca and also a little bit of that Lac-a-Dee, which I think benefited as well. But it has a richness and a fullness that, you know, we don't always see in this wine, and certainly not in other kind of Louise-based wines. Louise is a very nuanced, very subtle, very delicate. And I wouldn't say with Substrata we're trying to like force, you know, fullness on it. But I was just surprised that we were able to achieve it in this wine. And I think that has to do with not necessarily the ripeness of the Louise component, but just the other blend components and what they bring.
Yeah, and just so folks, you know, because you hadn't had a chance to look at the text sheet, this is 66% Louis Swenson, 21% Itasca. Itasca?
Itasca, or yeah, either way.
Itasca, 10.5% of Lac-a-Dee Blanc, and 2.5% of skin contact La Crescent. I don't know if that skin contact is what really gives it that, but it's funny that you mentioned, because that was what I was going to say about this wine, is that there's this phenolic compound. There's this textural aspect to this wine that I really, really enjoy. And initially, when I first tasted it, without not knowing what was it really in there, it's like, has this some skins? And there are like only like 2.5% of some skins. I was like, that's interesting. Like, why does this come off so phenolic to me? But like, not in a bad way, like, not
Yeah,
like
yeah.
phenomically bitter or any way, but like perfectly ripe. But there's a lot of like, again, that kind of a textural component that you only get from phenolic ripeness. But yeah, like your alcohol is in check, right? Like it's in balance. But it's got the body, it's got that kind of opulence, but it also finishes bone dry. I mean, just all around, I just think it's just like really well-rounded wine. So yeah, I was curious.
Yeah, it's definitely a wine that I would, well, a lot of our wines surprise people, because while they taste different, and you of course you can pull similarities out of this wine that you've tasted in other wines, but they're different enough, that they taste fairly unique, but they're good.
Yeah.
And that's not to pat myself on the back, but it's I think people are surprised. They're surprised that they're hybrid wines. A lot of times, they're not necessarily surprised that they're good, but they're surprised that they're hybrid wines and that the hybrid wines can have these sorts of characteristics.
Yeah, yeah, I really like this. I get a lot of like orchard fruit in this thing. Some like peach pits, as well as like yellow apples, citrus in here for sure as well. But like really ripe, like not over the top, like not overripe, but just like perfectly ripe, peak season. With again, and as other people on this call will attest to, like if the wine doesn't have acid, I don't drink it. Well, I don't put it on this wine club. So,
Well, that is one thing that we do not struggle with.
yeah,
Our bar for acidity in wine is like
see,
levels beyond the I don't even say average palate. Then people drinking kind of high altitude wines. We're a whole nother world.
this is why I like
But
Vermont
it's still,
wines.
but still very much balanced, right? Like when I'm not talking
Yeah,
about, we're not trying to just give you lemonade.
one
It's
hundred percent.
the
If this
balance is
didn't,
definitely important.
yeah, if this didn't have that ripe orchard fruit or that phenolic ripeness, it would just be like painfully searing acid, and
Yeah.
that's it. Uh, any first of all, do folks have any? Do you folks like the wine? Let's start there.
You won't hurt
Uh,
my feelings, don't worry.
yeah. Um, any comments, questions about the wine itself?
Yeah, this aftertaste is delicious. I mean, it's got a long finish to it. I love it.
Yeah, there's a little honeyed notes that they also develop. I don't know if any of it, maybe it's just a barrel, maybe seeing some oxygen during the winemaking, some oxidative side. But yeah, like the fruit quality changed from like that really ripe fruit to like little honeyed notes at the end, towards the end, back palate, which is really nice. Any other comments? You have the winemaker. You can tell them exactly what you think now. Cool. I always wonder about, it's just like thinking about it, it didn't really come to me until you were just talking about it. And I know that you have your own reference point of these grapes from past vintages, right? But like, it's so easy in almost like a artist's creative process to come up with something like this, like the percentage blending percentage and all of that, right? Like, what is that process like? I mean, do you have in your head kind of an idea of what wine that you want to create, and then do you find the components to kind of help you shape the sculpture to look like a certain thing, or do you make all these things separately and you have them vinified and you go taste each one of them, and it's like almost like an Iron Chef style cooking, where like these are the ingredients I have, I'm gonna figure out what to make with it. Yet even more challenging, I would imagine to be even more challenging, is that for you and the Vermont winemakers, like it's not even like you have a lot of reference point for many different iterations, many different artistic expressions of these different stylistic expressions that have existed out there. So you're trying to create something completely singular from something that you have very little reference points to. So like,
Yeah.
it must be
Yeah. Well, that's like one of the things that's one of the things that I absolutely love about it.
yeah.
We early on in my time, we did, a tremendous amount of experimenting, lots of different styles, lots of different separate stuff. you know, that as time went on, that became, you know, more difficult, logistically difficult. So we started settling on blends, combinations of varieties, you know, things because most of what we do is blends actually. But working with, but putting those blends together, not in their specific percentages, but in their, I'd say, relative percentages, and settling on, you know, kind of a rough framework over time with that experience. So there's, you know, there's definitely a little bit of that. There's definitely that artistic element to it. I think that has to be there. But then, you know, peel back the curtain a little bit, and there are just some real, there's realities that you face where some decisions are just forced, right? You know, if you can't fit it all here, some of it's got to go somewhere else, or you didn't, you know, or the raccoons ate 2/3 of your, you know, Itasca block, and now you only have a little bit of it to work with in your blend, or, you know, something like that. So there are those kinds of things that you're kind of rolling with in any given season. But no, this, I would say specifically with Substrata, if there's any of our wines that maybe this is more so, it's been a pretty intentional wine. But it's also been one that has evolved over time, right? Like in the beginning, it was probably 100% Louise, in like new oak. And, you know, I had an idea of like what I was hoping for, but like we didn't realize that until, you know, maybe this vintage, honestly. You know, so it took us a long time to kind of get there. You know, we don't work with any new oak. We have only neutral oak. You know, we've added the component of the Lacadie that we think enhances the blend. Before that we had introduced the Itasca, and part of that was also because when we first started making Substrata, we didn't have Itasca, right? So we really only had a couple, like Louise and La Crescent, to work with as our white varieties, and those two were just not ones that I wanted to put together for this wine and kind of the direction that I was thinking this wine would go. But the profile of Itasca and Lacadie definitely work well with Louise, and so then we've incorporated some of that. But again, it is one that changes. You know, the 2021 vintage had a different blend percentage. The 2023 will have a different blend percentage. But you know, it's all we play with it every year, and we taste and we kind of figure it out, and then we hope for the best.
Cool. That's where the artist side of you know, the winemaker is like a part artist, part scientist.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
for a lot of people, also part farmer.
So,
Yeah.
Nathan, you said earlier there's only 200 acres of vineyards in all of Vermont, or was that your 200 acres?
No. We currently only have a little over 11, and we're one of the top, you know, 2 or 3 growers. No, it's like statewide. There's only like 200 acres of grapes. I mean, we don't have.
That's just a big golf course. I mean, that's not a lot of acres.
It's tiny. And I mean, most, you know, I don't know, something like 75% of our state is forested. You know, most of it is, you know, clay, bottomland clay, in the valley, especially. So it's not like, you know, I don't know if we were talking about it before everybody jumped on or at some point in the beginning, but, you know, Vermont's never going to be like a major wine region. Not major in the sense of scale anyway. It will be by, you know, the nature of the geography of our state small. You know, we're not able to go out and nobody's going to have 100-acre vineyard anywhere. Those tracts of suitable land just don't exist. I mean, perhaps if we deforested a bunch, you know, maybe you could find that, but you know, nobody wants to do that.
Any other questions? Cool. Well, this part you may enjoy. just we play this game at the end of the tasting every session, which is where I ask everybody what they think this wine costs on a retail shelf and how much they're willing to pay, or how much they'd be happy paying for this on a retail shelf. Sometimes those numbers are wildly different. Sometimes they're about the same. I figured this would be a good set of data point for you as a maker. So folks, put it in the chat box. How much do you think this wine costs on a retail shelf? To how much would you be happy paying for this on a retail shelf? First time having Vermont wine. Your first Vermont wine. Well, how much do you think this will cost? How much would you pay? $30, $32, $25, $29, $25, $28. Okay. This wine on the retail shelf in DC would be $28. So they're all pretty much right on there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that. You got a few people who are in the 30s, Ethan. Don't raise the price. Cool. I know we're over an hour mark at this point, Ethan, but if you have a couple more minutes, I always like to wrap up with a couple rounds of quick fire questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So this is a question that I ask everyone who comes on the Six for Wine Club. Every member on this call has to answer this question at one point or another. So, which is 1, what would your gateway wine? 2, what would your epiphany wine? 3, what's the wine that you take with you to deserted island? What cooling is possible?
Well, you know my gateway wine. I was
Yeah.
Carlo Rossi. Boy, my epiphany wine. This is where I'm like a terrible interviewee. Don't know. There was a period of time where I was just drinking so much wine from like everything I could get my hands on. And yeah, I would say nothing. I don't think I really had like that. I don't have that wine. There's nothing that really sticks out. I mean, I've had some great bottles of wine, don't get me wrong, but not, yeah. And maybe that's just not really my personality. But then what was the last one?
What's your desert island wine?
Oh, desert island wine. Oh, ooh. Can I go blanket and just say like rosé?
Yeah, sure. I think rosé's an excellent answer. I've had some people throw out like Bordeaux. I was like, really? Like red Bordeaux? I was like, ooh.
No, I'd go like very light and very drinkable.
Yeah, okay. Do you have a favorite like a wine region or wine place, wine grape?
I've always been partial to the Rhone.
Okay.
But I like drinking from all over. I love Austria. I mean, I really like wines with acidity. So I have that as kind of just like a, you know, that's wrapped up in there. But no, I still have a very curious palate.
Yeah.
And then just, you know, buying the same bottles twice, you know, I certainly do it, but I like to spread out and just try. There's so many different wines out there from so many different places. It's, you know, I try and get as many as I can.
Excellent. And I also like as a winemaker, I would imagine that is important for you to always expose your palate to different things.
Yeah.
Last quick fire question I have is if imagine there's a metaphorical billboard where billions of people drive by it every day and they look at it. You can put on anything you want on there, image, quote, video, whatever you want on there. What would you put on there?
Maybe a jug of Vermont wine.
Love it. Well, that's all I got for you. Do you have any questions for us? Any comments? Do folks have any questions for Ethan? If people wanted to keep up to date with what you're up to, what Iapetus, what Shelburne Vineyards are up to, how can people follow you?
Yeah, you can check out our website, shelburnevineyard.com. There'll be a way to sign up for a newsletter there for things that are happening. Or you can check out the Iapetus website, although unfortunately that gets less that gets a little less attention day to day. But there's still relevant info there. But yeah, check out Shelburne Vineyard. I mean, that's where we have everything about all the brands and all the wines. And then yeah, I'm glad happy to be the first Vermont wine that you've had. Hopefully it won't be the last, and hopefully it's piqued your curiosity enough to go out and seek some more not only hybrid wines or Vermont wines, but yeah, wines from other non-traditional and very small up and coming regions.
Yeah, Ethan, on a personal journey or note on my personal journey, I've been I've meditated for a long time, but I kind of stopped and I picked it back up, and I've been continuously meditating for like last couple of months. And then I'm doing this program where like each kind of a journey, this set of kind of meditation sessions have a theme around it. And this particular one that I'm on right now, it's called Beginner's Mind. And then it's all about how to kind of let go of all these reference points that we have. Because, as an adult, as we grow, we've kind of set these reference points for all this experience that we've had throughout lives, but trying to approach things from a beginner's mind, from a blank state, and trying to experience it and just really be present at the moment and trying to experience it. Imagine you're experiencing it for the first time. And I feel like tasting your wine and talking about Vermont and this kind of attitude about we're not trying to create something that is just like everything else, trying to fit into the reference point, any of that. It reminds me again and again that like how, I don't know, it just kind of resonated with me, that it reminded me that rather than trying to approach wine from these kind of reference points, especially as somebody who's formally trained in that kind of way, right? Like I was like, you got to blind taste this, you got to know what these things taste like. So I have these very rigid reference points of different wine regions and wine styles that exist in my head. But then to always approach it with, like what's really present in the glass, what's happening there, what's happening in that place. And I think that kind of ethos and sensibility really exists in your bottle of wine and in Vermont wines in general. So it just resonated with deeply, particularly right now. So, but anyways, yeah, you're creating something exciting, if you ask me. I really do think as a climate change, I know you are facing your own challenges up there in Vermont, but I do think this hybrid and it's going to be increasingly more important discussion in the wine world. And Vermont is arguably, in my opinion, the leader in this country for that movement. So I hope, to Ethan's point, I hope this is not your last Vermont wine. I know this was your first for many, but continue to seek out other things out there because it's exciting. It's a fun new things, and always approach it with a beginner's mind, like what we talked about. So thank you, Ethan. Thank you for joining. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
All right. Have a good night, Ethan.
Bye.
All right. I'm going to turn off the recording.